Bonjour class, today we're learning about reflexive verbs in the past tense. We're going to review really briefly what a reflexive verb in the present tense is and what that does, but if you still need a little bit of a refresher, I'd recommend going back and looking at our past tutorial specifically about reflexive verbs in the present. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to do or know the following. We're going to go over a brief review of what a reflexive verb is. We're going to learn how to conjugate a reflexive verb in the passé composé. We're going to learn how to conjugate a reflexive verb in the passé composé in the negative, so how to say something did not happen. And we're going to learn how to conjugate a reflexive verb in the emparfei. So let's start off with a brief review of reflexive verbs. We should know this, but a reflexive verb shows that an action is being done to the main subject of the sentence, meaning that the action is reflecting back onto the subject. A reflexive verb is conjugated like any other verb with a reflexive pronoun in front of it. That's our rule that we learned for the present tense, and it more or less applies to the past tense as well. So don't panic, we're not going to be relearning passé composé or emparfei. We're just learning what slight changes need to be made for reflexive verbs. So, reflexive verbs in passé composé. Well, hopefully remember, passé composé is a helping verb, which is either avoir, être, plus the past participle. You always need these two things. There are two things that make up passé composé. That's why it's composé. It's composed of different elements. For reflexive verbs, the helping verb is always être. In the past, we've learned that the helping verb is être only for Van der Champ verbs. I lied to you to make it easier. I'm sorry. It is Van der Champ verbs for non-reflexive verbs, but every single reflexive verb out there will use être as the helping verb in the passé composé. So, on the plus side, it's pretty easy to remember. If you see that reflexive pronoun and you want to make it passé composé, you have to use être. But the past participle is determined the same way as you would if it's not a reflexive verb. So just a quick review, if you have a verb that ends in er, the ending of the past participle will be e accent aigu. If you have it for an ir verb, it'll just be an I for the ending. An re verb will have a u for the ending. And irregular verbs, you have to memorize them, but by now we probably know most of the irregular verbs. So, what you do to put the passé composé together for reflexive verbs. You put the reflexive pronoun, then the helping verb, then the past participle. So you just put the reflexive pronoun before the helping verb, before the first verb, and that makes it a reflexive verb in passé composé. So for example, if you want to say he woke up at 5 o'clock, il s'est réveillé à 5 heures. So here we see reflexive pronoun. Here we see the helping verb, être, conjugated for il, which makes it a. Then we see the past participle. This comes from réveiller, which is an er verb in the infinitive. So we can see that for the past participle, we just changed it to an e accent aigu. Quick reminder though, because the helping verb is être, just like we learned for if you're using that as the helping verb for Van der Champ, with reflexive verbs, same thing. When you use être as the helping verb in passé composé, the past participle has to agree with the noun in terms of number and gender. So here, nothing happened to the past participle because our subject was singular and male. But what if we wanted to change it to she woke up at 5 o'clock? We would change il to elle to change it from he to she, and then reflexive pronoun is the same, helping verb is the same, but the key difference about the past participle is because this is female, we added that e at the end to make the past participle agree with the gender here. Now if we want to make it negative, it gets a little tricky. Where do we put the ne? Where do we put the pas? Here's the order that things go in. You put the subject, then you put ne, then the reflexive pronoun, helping verb, pas, and past participle. For example, je ne me suis pas couché tôt. So think a little bit. We have suis here because it's the helping verb, because être conjugated for je is suis. Then we have our reflexive pronoun over here, and our past participle couché. Because this is me, and I'm female, I add that extra E at the end of the past participle. Otherwise, I wouldn't. So we have our subject here, which is je, ne, our reflexive pronoun, helping verb, pas, and past participle. And then to at the end just means early. What I'd really recommend is just choosing one simple sentence and memorizing in that sentence. So maybe this is the sentence that you memorize. I think it's a lot easier to memorize the order of words by memorizing a sentence than by memorizing all this up here, but whatever works better for you. So lastly, we know how to do passé composé, but to put them in the emparfei. This one's a little bit easier. Conjugate it just how you normally would for emparfei. But of course, the difference is you just put the reflexive pronoun in front of it. So a brief review. How do we conjugate for emparfei? You take the verb and you conjugate it for nu. You drop the ONS at the end of whatever that means. And then you add the endings. So for je, you add AIS. For tu, you add AIS. For il, elle, on, you add AIT. For nu, you add IONS. For vous, you add IEZ. And for il, elle, plural, you add AIENT. So same rules for emparfei for reflexive or non-reflexive verbs. You just put the reflexive pronoun between the subject and the verb, just like you do in the present, and just like you do with the helping verb of le passé composé. So for example, if you want to say we got up, nous nous levions. Okay, so that's emparfei. You have the subject, you have the reflexive pronoun, and this comes from lever. So we went to levons for the new form, dropped the ONS with lev, and we added the new ending back from here, which is levions. So that's emparfei. A little bit simpler than passé composé, but they're both very important to know. And that is the end of this lesson. Let me know what questions you have and get ready to practice tomorrow.